Okay, welcome everybody to today's panel. This is a 90th anniversary event, which means this is one of the events that's celebrating Maxwell's 90th anniversary. It's organized by the International Relations Program with support from the Maxwell Dean's Office. So our thanks to the Maxwell Dean's Office for the funding. It's a very appropriate event for the 90th anniversary because the three women you'll hear from today are alumni, and I think it really showcases the things that our students, both at the undergraduate, master's, PhD level, go on and do in the world. And I think you'll be just as impressed as I am once you hear from them. This event is part of a larger International Women's Day celebration. We had a great panel last night from the Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Tonight, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, we're going to have Major General Linda Singh. She's an emerging leader in the United States. She is the head of the Maryland National Guard. She was deployed to Afghanistan recently and returned, I think, in 2012. She'll be talking about the importance of military community engagement. She's a great speaker. She's served the university as a very popular speaker for VWISE, which is Veterans Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship. So I hope you can make that event tonight, and there'll be a reception to follow with Major General Singh. Between 2 and 3, there's also an event in career services with our alumni guests who have graciously agreed to answer any question you'd like to ask that you don't feel like you want to ask here today. So that's also open to our graduate and undergraduate students. Aside from the Maxwell Dean's Office and Maxwell Dean's Office staff, especially Norma, who's here today with us, I'd like to thank a couple other folks, the wonderful staff in the International Relations Program, and the Arts and Sciences Communications team, and the Maxwell ICT team for putting it together. As I said, we will be videotaping this event, so if you'd like to share it with others, I hope, especially the graduate students. I know we have a lot of women in the building who would like to work internationally, and I hope they are able to share in the collective wisdom that we're going to hear from today. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event. It's Dr. Francine D'Amico. Dr. D'Amico is an associate professor of international relations, and she's the undergraduate director of the International Relations Program. Dr. D'Amico?
Thanks, Mary. In honor of International Women's Day 2015, I want to start with a tribute to the women behind the scenes who made our panel today possible. You've met International Relations Program Chair and Professor of Economics, Mary Lovely. Senior Administrator Deanna Phillips, who's not in the room right now, but I know all of our panelists know her. Our Office Coordinator, Angela Allen, who's running around with the camera right there. And Academic Advisor, Amy Kennedy. They've done the Yo Woman share of the planning, logistics, materials, budgeting, and so forth for today's event. And so thank them for their efforts. A little bit of context. We're standing here at Syracuse University, which was established in 1870. And we have been, as all of our archival materials point out, co-ed from the start, meaning women were allowed at the founding of the university. Unlike some of our other universities, Harvard, for example, didn't admit women until 1879, and in that context, they were admitted in what was then called the Annex, and later called Radcliffe College of Harvard University. By 1970, the ratio of men to women students was still 4-to-1. Here at Syracuse University this year, 56% of our students are women, 44% are men, so go girls. All right. Maxwell School was founded by George Holmes Maxwell. This is not him, this is Abe Lincoln, just in case you were wondering. He focused on American citizenship, which for the time frame was entirely appropriate. But our panel today reflects a sense of global citizenship that we are indeed our brothers and sisters keepers. We have 3 terrific panelists for you today. I grabbed a program when I got up because I'm going to introduce them in the order that they are in the program, and you do have some information about them in the program for you. So first, and our first speaker will be Deborah Alexander. Her international work has focused on electoral and political reform, civil-military relations, conflict resolution, and women's development. And she has served in a range of positions at the State Department, with key positions also in USAID, U.S. Joint Forces Command, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Deborah returned from Afghanistan in late 2013 after serving almost a decade there as a senior policy advisor and program manager, the longest serving civilian for the U.S. government in Afghanistan. In her last assignment there, Deborah was part of an interagency team that oversaw U.S. government field operations with 400 civilian colleagues at 80-plus different field offices throughout the country. She served as the first U.S. senior diplomat and deputy head of mission during the U.S. Marine counterinsurgency surge in the strategically key southern region in Afghanistan, and was principal subject matter expert and advisor for the historic Afghan elections in 2004 and 2005. Deborah also was the first civilian embedded with Army Special Forces soon after 9/11, supervising USAID projects ranging from rebuilding schools and bridges to creating radio stations, including 3 women-operated stations. Before Afghanistan, she worked in several countries experiencing conflict or undergoing political transition, including Bosnia, Albania, Serbia, Somalia, Pakistan, Kosovo, and Indonesia. Since leaving the State Department, she has worked as an international affairs consultant for development, democratization, and military companies, including IDS International, the U.S. Army's Joint Regional Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. Most recently, she was a member of the official U.S. delegation to observe both the presidential and parliamentary elections in Ukraine. Deborah?
Well, I'm, first of all, going to be the spark plug, and that I thought we were having sort of a panel discussion.
That's it.
And so I don't have prepared remarks.
Okay.
I have remarks about the questions that we thought might be interesting to all of you. Do you have prepared remarks?
All right. Well, I'll do all the introductions then, and then we'll chat.
That sounds great to me, unless you have a presentation. I was thinking about doing a PowerPoint.
Then she decided instead. All right. So Alex, I'll introduce you next. So I'll skip one because she's closer to me. Alexandria has 11 years work experience on 4 continents, specializing in social enterprise development and emerging market finance. She spent 5 years with doing strategy consulting work for Monitor Inclusive Markets and Booz Allen Hamilton, and several years with in international development working for CHF International, DAI, and On the Frontier Group. Also Trikali and Mongolian Investment Capital Corporation. Currently, Alex is Associate Director of, I'm going to just butcher this, Shirako. And I tried it ahead of time, I'm sorry. A nonprofit investment broker for Somali medium enterprises. Much of her career has been focused on post-conflict countries. She's worked in Afghanistan, where she launched a low-income housing program for returnees and refugees, South Sudan, where she taught business development skills to women's cooperatives, and Somalia, where she currently facilitates impact investment funds into local businesses to stimulate job creation and strengthen the private sector. Alex has a Master's of International Business, concentrating on emerging market finance from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and a BA in History and Political Science from Syracuse University. While at Syracuse, she won the Big East Championship in field hockey and competed in the Elite 8 round of the national tournament. Alex sits on the board of the Afghan Scholars Initiative, which helps top Afghan students obtain a quality international high school and university education. And our third panelist is Lemis Schliemann. who graduated with a BA in Public Administration from the American University of Beirut in 2008 and a Master's in International Relations and NGO Management from the Maxwell School of Citizenship here at Syracuse University in 2010. Upon graduation from Maxwell, she led the M&E department at USAID OTI Lebanon for 2.5 years, where she created a number of M&E tools, case studies, evaluations, and indices that are currently being used in multiple USAID OTI projects worldwide. In 2012-2013, Lamis handled the regional information and M&E portfolios of 4 country programs with International Medical Corps, where the Syrian crisis has taken its toll. In this capacity, she developed and managed multi-million-dollar projects related to medical interventions in crisis, aid distribution, and capacity building of local NGOs and youth groups, working on promoting a better standard of living for the displaced and injured Syrians. In 2013 and going forward, Lamis worked on gender-related portfolios with the United Nations Population Fund, serving as the HIV Awareness Raising Program Coordinator. Then she became the gender focal point with Baladi Plus, a project funded by USAID and managed by Management Systems International. As a lead M&E specialist working on municipal capacity building, women's empowerment was the heart of her work. She developed metrics to measure women's participation in local development and post-conflict reconstruction, and she pioneered women empowerment workshops in Lebanon for local and national decision-making. Lamis is also an M&E consultant and trainer with regional field experience in Syria, Jordan, Tunis, Turkey, Yemen, and Libya during conflict periods, and is originally from Lebanon. Okay, that's our panel. Right. And our questions, I asked the panelists to think about a group of questions just to get us started in our conversation. They all have had such different but similar experiences working in post-conflict and post-conflict areas. So one of the questions I asked them all to think about was, what did you enjoy most about your Maxwell experience, and in what ways did your Maxwell experience prepare you for your career? So who wants to start? How about you, Deborah, since I buttonholed you earlier?
First of all, I have to say thank you for bringing me here. It's such a delight to be back in Maxwell. Walking around campus this morning, so much has changed and so much is similar, but it does feel like being back home. I thought a lot about, the education that I had here, and in some ways I was an atypical student because I already lived in Syracuse and I was already a local government official and a political and social activist here. And then I was looking for a place that could be my graduate home. And as I continued to look at universities and colleges, I found out that the place that I felt like I was most comfortable with and that would accept me and that would honor both my practice but also put me in an academic, a theoretical, philosophical environment that I could think about some big questions, turned out to be Maxwell right here at home. And when I think about what I have, so much, of course, any of us in our undergraduate or graduate experiences that we carry on with us, but there are some specifics that I have time and time again reflected on that I think probably helped me with my career. One is the interdisciplinary nature of who we are, because I was never a person that I would see stovepipes or I would see boundaries and borders, but I was always much more interested in crossing those getting rid of the stovepipe, crossing the borders, building bridges. And I was never just interested in one thing. I was interested in women's studies, I was interested in anthropology, psychology, sociology, political science. And so Maxwell was a place that honored that. And I have found in my own work, oftentimes at State Department, USAID, and Department of Defense, the agencies that I have most of my work experience, at least recently, is that people tend to come at a problem with one approach, with one set of eyes. And at Maxwell, you realize that there is probably not any one answer to a problem. There may be many answers to a problem. and many different approaches. And I think that has really served me well. And the other thing I loved about Maxwell that has helped me in my career is that I was able to work with a lot of different kinds of people here. You know, I worked with Muslim students when I was a student here. I worked with people from different parts of the world, different economic backgrounds, and I think that also prepared me for the diversity and the challenges that I had in some of the countries that I've been able to serve. So I'll stop there. That sort of kicks off the conversation.
Thank you for having me here. It's very humbling to be among this panel and back in what I consider home. My choice of coming to Maxwell was shaped by my desire to become a better citizen of my country, Lebanon. My country at that time was going through a turmoil. The prime minister had been assassinated, and I was a pre-med student. Believe it or not, I chose to become someone who wants to serve the public, and what is better than Maxwell to nurture all those ideals of becoming a better citizen, a world leader, and an empowered woman, in a country that does not really value the impact of women. So part of the Fulbright scholarship was to choose university and to be matched there, and I was very insistent on coming to Maxwell for all those things because, first of all, the hands-on experience that this university and this particular department offers is unmatched anywhere else in the US or elsewhere in the world. Second of all, the capstones and the simulations that we get as students and that the faculty offer us with also prepare you for the work that you're going to accept. So as an M&E specialist, I got most of my experience from some of my professors here. Even my leading jobs were through connections made by professors here. So Maxwell did not only give me the education, but also the opportunity to become an employed person, as everyone knows, post-graduation, and also a better woman myself. Some of the things I just put down as notes that helped me throughout my experience are the hands-on experience that you get while doing your coursework, the simulations that you do towards the ends of your semesters, especially the capstone, having the opportunity to meet guest speakers from all spectrums of life, especially in the areas that we focus on, having international friends and even friends who come from countries that your own country is at war with, and being able to break those barriers that you previously had because of the media or because of the geopolitical borders. That has been incredible to me and very eye-opening. And also motivation for me to seek beyond the borders. And the faculty, the staff will always be supportive. 6 years after graduation, and I still call Diana and Janice and Ryan in DC for help, and they're always there for me. So I assure you will always find them whenever you need them. And your professors, of course. And coming to Maxwell gives you a skill set of experience that you do not come with from your undergraduate. Even if you did your undergraduate in Syracuse, what you will learn at the graduate program will be very enriching and very diverse. And diversity was what made me a better person.
Again, kind of to echo their sentiments, thank you for having me. This is thrilling to be back for it's been quite a while, and it's kind of exciting to see Maxwell again and to kind of share in this community again. I definitely would echo a lot of what they would say in terms of the benefit of Maxwell. I guess kind of two things that they haven't touched on or kind of different takes from my perspective is I actually started at the business school, and it probably is unfair to the business school, but I remember a lot of the introductory classes, things that I thought were a little bit, how do I put this? Some of the business classes weren't necessarily the intellectual challenge or the kind of the depth of discovery and looking at an issue at a lot of different ways. A lot of the introductory business classes were kind of marketing, and your product, the Coca-Cola can should represent the product, and it should match to your customers. Well, yeah, no kidding. We've been drinking Coke, and I hadn't really been getting. It wasn't kind of reaching my intellectual curiosity, and I thought, you know what? I've always really liked history. I'm just going to go to Maxwell. So I actually shifted early on. I went to Maxwell, and I did history and political science. And one of the benefits that I found there that I don't think I was getting out of the business program was that you have to read a tremendous amount and you have to digest all of that information. And I thought that was very much applicable to your day-to-day work and kind of your daily task in the office. A lot of times things aren't set straight, especially being in Afghanistan or anytime you go into a new country, you have to quickly get up to speed on, what's the culture, what's the politics, what are the ethnic groups, what are underlying issues. And so I think by kind of going through history and political science, I was actually really able to kind of be prepared to look at an issue from multiple different angles and start to see what were some of the critical issues that I should be kind of sussing out. So I think that's one thing for Maxwell that it pushed me, and I think it really prepared me for what would my work world be. The second thing was, and I was an undergrad here, I didn't fully have, I'd studied history, and I did East Asian history, and I looked at politics in Europe, and I kind of didn't quite know where I was going, but my last semester at Syracuse was actually in the DC program, and for me, everything clicked. You had to do an internship. We had all night classes, and then one day of day classes. And during the day classes, we went around, we spoke to representatives from the Chinese embassy. We met Ted Koppel. We went to the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate. And it was really exciting. And it kind of was the first time in my life where I got to pull together things I had been studying in the classroom, my internship, and kind of being able to put all the pieces of kind of like, how does the world actually work, and who's writing what, and who talks to who. And I think to me that really kind of crystallized things and kind of helped me. I ended up staying in DC after that program, and I got my first job at Booz Allen shortly after. So for me, it was a very kind of eye-opening experience and really kind of pulled together all of my learning in a very tangible way.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Just kind of building on that. So my next question to you was, what rewards and challenges have you encountered in your work? And I tacked on, given the theme of the panel, particularly in terms of your field work in a conflict zone. Sometimes that's during ongoing military operations. So kind of what are the rewards and challenges of that? But if you want to talk about the rewards and challenges back home at the office too, that'd be great. Whoever wants to start. Do you want me to go? Go for it.
I think probably a lot of us in this room are kind of motivated by, not profit, but a greater world, a more positive place to live in. And I think the reward is working with people. I think it's really exciting I've worked in Mongolia and Afghanistan and Sudan and Tunisia, and it's really exciting to kind of finally have a connection with someone, but then it's also really exciting to see their business grow. And a lot of times when you're in these situations, the human spirit is relatively the same. I mean, people they want safety and security, they want to prosper, they want to, find love and be loved, and they want to get married and have children. So it's really, it's rewarding on a personal level just to make those connections and kind of watch people, hopefully you're able to contribute to their, building their skills or their capacity. And it's also rewarding because you learn so much in those situations about yourself and how to navigate kind of complicated environments. Challenges. Oh gosh, challenges of working abroad as being a woman.
I've got yeah.
Yeah. I think the first there's definitely a couple of challenges. I would say the first one, I lived in Mongolia and India, probably the two longest places I've lived abroad. And I think one of the challenges is that there's no anonymity. You are watched everywhere. A lot of cultures, and there are not a lot of, in my instance, white people that live around, and definitely no white women. And so they're very interested in what you buy in the market and who you're talking to and who took you home in a taxi cab. And it can be, I think, very exhausting on a personal level. And then I think professionally, the challenges are a lot of societies that I've worked in, cultures I've worked in, are very paternalistic. They're very male-led. And so as a woman in those situations, you end up being, especially as kind of, you end up being what they call, or I've called maybe, I learned this in Afghanistan, the term the third gender.
gender.
Yeah.
Third gender.
where you're not a man, you're definitely not a local woman, but they kind of don't quite know how to really interact with you. They're not going to necessarily give you the full respect immediately as a man. You kind of have to earn that. But they also don't expect you to kind of clean and go get tea as you would be of kind of how they perceive their women. So I think that is definitely something that is challenging to kind of navigate those waters on how to be that third gender. And it is, there's some kind of positive and negatives about it. And I think one of the positives is it allows you to, you're not necessarily initially defined in one of these two categories, so you have a little bit of access. But I think it's also nice that you can speak to women, and a lot of times women behind the scenes in the households are the ones making decisions. The men are going to be making decisions kind of, at least in the public, but really at home, where are the kids going to school and how much money are they spending on things. A lot of those decisions are driven by the women, and by being a woman, you have that access to them. So it's kind of a positive and negative.
I found very much in thinking of Afghanistan, for instance, as you mentioned it, there is this term that a lot of us use, the third gender, and absolutely right is that I had access to both men and women in Afghanistan, whereas my male colleagues could only, whether they were military or civilian, could only interact with men in Afghanistan. They could never be seen with a woman. They couldn't go to someone's home for tea and ask to talk to the wife or wives, whereas I could work with both. And that was, one of the great rewards was being able to access both sides, all sides, if you will. And I also found, I think people always assume, given Afghanistan's history and culture, that being a woman and being out in the field, I spent most of my time out of Kabul, most of my time in the provinces, most of my time either by myself and one soldier driving around or with other soldiers. And people would assume that it was a very difficult as a woman to do that, and I'll talk about some of those challenges in a minute. But for the most part, I was always very pleased and humbled how, whether it's Afghanistan or Albania, or probably most any other country, that I was welcomed and listened to and established some really strong partnerships and friendships, men and women in that country. Some of the challenges, as you would expect, it's 9/11, let's think about, and we were all in sort of a traumatized state. And I immediately, a few months after 9/11, find out that I'm going to Afghanistan. And then I'm in Kabul for all of 42, 43 hours, and the ambassador looks at me and says, "We're going to send you out in the field." And we hadn't had an American diplomat in country for 15 years, and suddenly I'm going out to the provinces to shake hands, meet governors, meet warlords, sprinkle money around small projects and a number of other things. And I thought it would be a great adventure, and it did turn out to be that. But no one asked questions like very practical questions. Where are you going to sleep? What kind of toilet as a woman? They don't have girls' toilets out there in military bases or the special forces. Are you going to wear a scarf? So there were just a lot of practical questions about being a woman that didn't occur to my male colleagues back at State Department or USAID that I had to manage. Also, there were the really big questions, and that is, what does it mean when you're the only woman that shows up at a small forward operating base and you're surrounded by 25 special forces, and you're the only U.S. government civilian, and there is, different cultures in both military and civilian cultures, and then you're a woman. And so I immediately had to figure out how to get them on my side, make sure that I had enough to contend with, that I didn't want my American soldiers to be also, that I would be fighting with them. And so I immediately had to figure out a way of putting them at ease about what I was there. And so I spent a lot of time talking about collaboration and cooperation and the fact that I was there to really leverage the work that they were doing, because they had money besides, you think of them as combat, but they also bring a lot of money, and they were doing a number of small development projects. And so how did I help with the projects they were doing so that they would be more sustainable, more grassroots focused, and also using some of the small pots of money that I had. And I immediately found out, for instance, that I had to sort of put myself in a position of being a sister, aunt, mother. I had to establish that role with them so that it was clear we would avoid any sort of landmines, so to speak. But it was those kinds of questions that I know that my male colleagues, as we started expanding that program, eventually I was the only person in the field for about 18 months. And then we started expanding that program. And eventually, you know, fast forward to 2011, we have over 400 people, you know, development specialists, diplomatic representatives, and agricultural specialists out in the field working with Afghans. But at the time, I was sort of, you know, a woman of all hats. But it just, people didn't think about those questions. And then there's also the practical challenges, I think, of which is different. I always wait, I say I'm waiting for a war to break out in like Prague or London or Paris. Not that I would want that on anyone, you know, but I mean, I work in these places that, for male or female, military or civilian, has real challenges. You know, how do you learn to sleep at night when for years you sleep for an hour or two and then the rockets start coming in? The sirens go off. How is it that you come back to the United States and learn to walk on grass when you haven't been able to walk on grass for 8 years because there's landmines buried every place? And so those kinds of challenges also.
Thank you for your very rich experience, both of you. I've never been to Afghanistan, but probably it's down the line since I've been. Recently, I've been in Syria, and as you know, Syria is going a very, very big war right now, and there's plenty of refugees. But before that, I also live in a country that has always been in war, whether in a civil unrest or across the borders. So working after graduation has given me lots of rewards and definitely lots of challenges, which I will outline right now. So part of the rewards working with USAID in Lebanon and in the region has been leaving impact on the lives of people. So the money that taxpayers pay in the US and what we've learned of how to channel that in a program here in Maxwell has been affected by building homes and shelters for lots of refugees, giving medical aid. I've seen mothers smile, I've seen babies saved, I've seen people who would have lost their lives, have their lives restored through medical intervention. I've attended lots of amputation surgeries in the couple of years, which got me traumatized. But at the same time, I've seen thousands of people walk through the borders into Jordan or through Turkey or to Lebanon, which through our type of work, we're able to provide a home away from home for them. So, you know, when you see the joy of giving a non-food item kit to a family in Antakya that has just fled from Aleppo, or a family in Tripoli, North Lebanon, which usually they send their sons to fight in return of money, and then all of a sudden they're doing vocational training. That is the impact that I'm talking about. This is how you reach people. This is the connection that you build. You give them a chance of a better life when they probably did not have it because of the circumstances. I would like to quote one of the youth that I worked with in North Lebanon. He used to be fighting on the front lines in North Lebanon, Tripoli, between the Sunnis and the non-Sunni groups in the north. And after OTI's intervention, I went and met the same guy who used to have a big, big rifle, and he said, right now I have a hair dryer and I do women's hair because of the vocational training. This is my weapon. And to me, this was a very strong statement that someone was willing to give up lots of easy money to kill other people, to just do a vocational training and benefit from that and be able to support the family. So to me, as a woman, it was easy. And this is the reward. You see the things happening right in front of you in your own lifetime. Not waiting 10 and 15 years to see things happening. In terms of challenges working in the field in conflict-prone zones, definitely what I've done has put my life to lots of threat. I was stuck in Syria in the Atme camp where the British aid worker got kidnapped and later on beheaded by ISIS at the exact same time. Some of my colleagues were kidnapped. I was not, luckily. That's why I'm here. I was close to death a couple of times by rockets, mortars, you name it, shelling in Lebanon, in Syria, and on the front lines of Jordan. But you know, you have to take some risks because the rewards are much greater than the risks sometimes. Definitely my family was one of the first, you know, challenges to me being involved in this type of work. They would always say, why don't you just get married, have some kids, stay at home, you know, just ascribe me to the gender roles of a woman in the Middle East. Well, I refused that for the longest time. And I decided to be out there helping other women make better decisions, you know, and just telling them that you too can break those barriers. You can form national councils for your own local communities. And they did, which is very impressive. You know, you just need the motivation yourself, and then you need to give it to someone else to have the ball rolling. Another part of the challenge is working as an aid worker associated with US funding is lack of acceptance of US funding. In some areas in South Lebanon, for example, where Hezbollah has very strong strongholds, they resisted any kind of projects that USAID was doing. The same thing in Jordan. They were very hostile to some US funding. They were, you know, people would just vandalize our projects, destroy the homes that we were building, even destroy the field hospitals or the ambulances that we're setting up to help other people, including the local community. So once you draw this connection, I mean, people took the UN less aggressively than they did with just USAID. So this is something just to give you, you know, just as a little tip, when you're associated with the UN, it's, you know, people would accept it a little bit more than they do with the US in special areas. Also, if you want to go to war zones, you should expect that there will be mines everywhere, as, you know, others have said, car bombs, rockets. I mean, this is a lifestyle that, you know, no one wants to have, but yet if you want to make an impact, you would be willing to take those risks. So as a woman, I had sometimes had to wear some headscarf, especially when going inside the refugee camps in Al-Zaatari camp in Jordan, in Al-Azraq in Jordan, and also in the camps in Syria. In Lebanon, I didn't have to wear the headscarf much because the people who came into Lebanon seemed to be a little bit more open than those who ended up in those other two regions. So, but I put my hair back. You know, you cannot wear revealing clothes. You cannot show lots of skin when you're talking to people who have some strong religious backgrounds. So that's one thing I have to keep in mind. At some points, one of the challenges was, you know, I was caught at Beirut's airport for entering into Syria, and that was not okay. So I had to change my passport, and I had to use a nickname. My nickname was Rania. People called me a different name so that I would still be able to do my work, which was fine. I mean, I didn't get used to my new name, but people would call me Rania, and then I'd blank out, and then, oh, it's me. And yeah, especially like when you're getting questions, and then you're like, oh, who's Rania? Rania who? And then, yeah. So this is part of the challenge. Well, I was not born in a country that respects citizens so much. I've seen war since I was a little kid. So to me, you know, being in a war zone was not as maybe traumatizing as to you guys. But this is definitely something I don't want to continue to see. I hope we create better communities, at least, in the near future and so on. Thank you.
You've already spoken, each of you, a little bit to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because keep us in the context of International Women's Day. So as a woman in your field, right? Additional challenges, additional rewards that you may have experienced, or maybe that you anticipated that didn't occur, or?
Well, where do I start? I'll start with the rewards first, I think. I mentioned already the fact that I have found usually that being a woman has actually not been limiting, but has been expansive for me. It's allowed me to have conversations broader than even my male colleagues have had. So there's been that real reward. One of the other rewards, as you were talking, I was thinking about this, is that on one hand, it's a downside, and on the other hand, it's an upside. You know, that's how life often is. But as a woman, oftentimes in these environments representing either USAID or Department of State, for instance, I was day in and day out at the negotiations as Afghanistan was creating its new constitution. The same thing in Bosnia. And because I was the girl, I was asked, given the opportunity, to think about women's protections in those documents. And so the downside of it is that my male colleagues should have thought of these ideas, and it shouldn't have been just me, thinking about human rights. But the upside was it gave me this wonderful opportunity. So in both Bosnia and Afghanistan, for instance, women are citizens. Women were given the right to vote at 18. Women were given the right to run for office. Those were not in either of the drafts of those constitutions. And after I finished, they were. And in both countries, I made sure, something that we don't have here in the United States, but there is a quota in both of those countries where a certain percentage of women have to be elected to both provincial delegations and to national legislatures. And that a number of my AID and Department of State colleagues that work on governance and democracy issues have done similar kinds of advocacy across the board. So there's been that real advantage when you talk about the rewards and the things that we've seen, seeing women go to the polls, seeing women run for office fills my heart, and I look back on my work, and it's some of the stuff that I'm most proud of. And the same thing with girls' education in Afghanistan. We were really strong to advocate for money set aside, U.S. taxpayers' money to be set aside for girls' education in Afghanistan. And that meant schools, that meant high schools, that meant college scholarships. And so those are enormous rewards of the work. Challenges of the work, as I've mentioned, I think that when we're in a conflict zone or we're in a transitioning society, there are questions that we have to think about that maybe our male colleagues don't have to think about. It's been interesting to me as I think about mentorship, because I've been thinking a lot about lean in, mentorship, who mentored me. I was very lucky to have some terrific mentors here in Syracuse, both here at Maxwell School, but also political, social mentors, elected officials that were, important mentors to me. And I had learned, though, that, for instance, at Department of State, just because we had Secretary Albright, Secretary Rice, Secretary Clinton, just because you have a leader at the top does not mean that you have an organization that's gender neutral or woman friendly. And when I looked around at who the supervisors were, who are the office directors, who are the ambassadors, who are the mission directors, particularly in conflict zones, there's something about conflict that's identified with men, peace, women, and we don't, it wasn't until 2012 that we got the first woman ambassador in Afghanistan. We had been there a decade. And we'd had 4 or 5 ambassadors every year in Afghanistan. And it's just that, so when you look at the ranks and you think about mentorship, and you think about working at a particular place, I did not necessarily find Department of State. You would think, given the secretaries, that it opened up a lot of opportunity and space for us, but we didn't have a lot of women between, a field rat like myself and the Secretary of State, and you need to have women in all those other levels as well, and that's certainly a challenge. I found my military colleagues actually to be much more egalitarian, because there's something about rank in the military, and if you can establish yourself, and I never imagined those late nights. My roommate in my college days are here. I would get up. I set a discipline, finally figured out that I wasn't going to get that dissertation done if I didn't start getting up about 4 o'clock in the morning and actually making myself start to do writing for a couple of hours. And I didn't realize at the time that finishing my dissertation would have such a benefit. But with my military colleagues, being Dr. Alexander established a rank for them. And so there wasn't a question to them about working with me and accepting me and affording a respect and a collegiality. And I have talked with other women that have worked closely with military and the same kind of thing. And so there's definitely something about that culture versus the culture of State Department that gave us pause. So that's sort of the challenges. And then the last thing I'll say is, I always say if I'm ever going to write a book, no, I say this only tongue-in-cheek, understand that, but that I would call it possibly Ballbuster Bitches and Witches, because I have been called all that, usually by my U.S. government civilian colleagues. So, but it's changing.
I'll definitely build on some of the challenges that.
She's ready to explode. You better let her talk.
One of the things she mentioned is kind of it's a little bit lonely being a woman in these situations, and I think it's very true. I lived in South Sudan, and maybe similar to your situation, I landed in Juba, and they said, well, you don't live here, you live 8 hours in the bush. I was like, well, I've only been in the country for like 48 hours, so this seems bad. That's only going to be worse. So I lived out there with 9 polygamists and a monkey. And they were all men, and we lived in a compound, which was like a bamboo fence. And then all of their wives lived outside of our compound. And I was the only woman, and sometimes I would go and I would just sit with the women just to have interaction. They would be, killing chickens, defeathering them, preparing them to cook, and I would just kind of sit and hang out with them, because sometimes it's kind of nice just to have a couple women to hang out with, even if you have no idea what they're talking about. And the other thing in Afghanistan, I definitely was covered when I was interacting, but I found kind of some of the unique challenges that I don't think men fully appreciate is, so I was the first person on the ground, and I started up a low-income housing program, and so that meant I bought cars for the program. I hired the staff. I figured out the logistics. I figured out where we're going to buy the lumber to build the houses. We did the site visits. I kind of took the lead on all of that. But when I hiring Muslim men, totally fine to work with, but a lot of times they wouldn't approach me within a certain radius. So I couldn't hand a pen to a lot of my Muslim colleagues. I would have to put it down on the table and take a step back, which isn't a major issue, but it definitely kind of, it opens up your eyes. Okay, well, if they're not even willing to engage me, how making sure that culturally that you're fully respecting their space and making sure they're comfortable and trying to learn how to operate in this new dynamic that I had never even considered, never even considered the challenges of, what do they think about women and what's appropriate, and definitely wearing baggy clothes, as you were mentioning, and so I think that is definitely kind of a little bit of a challenge to navigate that. And I didn't work with the military, so I didn't have that structure, but I think for me, one of the challenges was building that respect. Working with local men, it's a lot of drinking tea, it's a lot of talking about families, it's a lot of, before you can even get to any of the business aspect of what you're there to do, a lot of it, and just putting in the time and the hours and building that respect. And then kind of looking, a lot of the people that I worked with, the beneficiaries, clients, Afghanis, Mongols, Sudanese, a lot of who I worked with were within the business community and with women. And I think working with those beneficiaries, so not just talking about our own role of being women, but their challenges and rewards for being being a woman in those societies is, one thing is these women, they don't have an education. So if you have children and family, the men are always going to be educated. So it's so hard for a woman if they've lost their husband in war, or if he drinks too much, or kind of all of the other challenges. It's the woman's there. She has the whole burden of the family. She has the whole burden of the kids, but then she's also at a greater disadvantage because she doesn't have the education. So I worked with a lot of women, and I think working with women for me was really rewarding, because I think there's a little bit of a guard that men might have in foreign countries, but I think the women there's definitely still kind of a little bit of apprehension, who are you, what you're doing, but the initial conversation was much easier having that with women and with men. And I think some of the women's cooperatives I worked with Sudan, I had such a wonderful time working with those women. And I think they're a little bit just more open to trying to figure out because I worked with a translator, and we had to translate twice. So I spoke in English, he spoke in Sudanese Arabic, and then we went into the tribal tongue. So to have these connections, sometimes it's a long process of translating and sitting and drinking tea. But I think it's really rewarding, working with these women, and they're like sponges. They want to learn, they want to see what you're doing, they want to understand. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about working with women in these situations is a lot of times the women have the lowest income jobs. They don't own medium-sized enterprises. They don't own large enterprises. They're beekeepers. They're making a couple $100, if at most, a month. They're maybe bakers. They are maybe they're seamstresses. But I think what that does is that really shows you kind of the underpinnings of society. What's happening? What are their challenges? And it's real. You really understand kind of the local Afghani person by understanding the women and looking at their jobs. So I think it's really rewarding to work with that kind of that bottom layer of the pyramid. And I think there's a lot of appreciation for what you're trying to teach them, and I think for the skills that they're learning and observing.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to what they said, part of the positive thing of being a woman and working in such zones is the ease of getting information. Believe it or not, women, mothers, and children will be more open to talk to a woman, to a female, than they would to a male, especially about sex-related issues, especially about family control, about conception and how to not have that in in a camp, all those kind of stuff. It was easier to interact with the women and children. And once that rapport has been made, being a woman myself, the fathers and the males were, more open to talk as well. So versus having a male colleague doing the exact same job, it was much easier for me to get the information than have someone else. So that definitely worked in my favor. Although I did get lots of those questions. What do you know? You're a woman. Or, for example, working on municipal governance and encouraging and setting up advocacy campaigns in Lebanon for women to run for municipal offices. Just to give you a proportion, in Lebanon, the ratio of men to women is 9-1. 9 women to 1 man. And yet, you see only 2 females in the parliament and only 100 in municipal offices, over 1,500 positions. So this is a very, very, very big disparity between both sexes. So when you get questions like, what do you know, you're a woman, it automatically associates that, being a woman is, inferior in terms of thinking and, dissecting information or doing programs versus a man. Well, the challenge was to just show people that you are capable by doing and not just by telling or by just looking in a certain way or another. So to me, this has been like, you always have to prove it to yourself first and then to others that, being a woman does not mean that you are anything less of a man who can do the exact same job, whether it's a danger zone or a more, UN-based job in the office, not in the field. You always have to prove that in those kind of countries. And also having field work being associated with man jobs, like when you're, driving a big car and, learning how to use some weapons and, learning how to evacuate quickly, learning the names of, certain explosions. People associate that with man jobs, and they often call you like, you're half a man or something like that. To me, it was not an issue of who does what and at what time, as long as the thing gets done. And one of the very big challenges was managing a team of doctors who are way older than I am, who are all males, inside Syria, and having them accept that I'm giving them certain directions of how to do things or how to report back to USAID. That was tough. Like, they would not accept that, someone A, younger than them, B, a woman, is asking them to do that, even though those people they do have the education. It's not like you're dealing with a whole crowd of people who have not gotten any education. So yeah, gender differences in certain cultures, you have to get attuned to that and learn how to play by the rules until it passes through. So just to cite a small example from my home country, Lebanon, as I said, women do not really take part in local decision-making or even at the national level. But recently with proper advocacy, and we've done lots of campaigns with UAID and EU and other types of funding, more women have been running to elections, and they won, actually. They started to win, because once they built their own trust in themselves and in their campaigns, people started to buy in and to elect them to offices. I think we're changing a little bit here, and I'm really happy that I took part in doing that and accepting the challenges that I have faced, because it did make me a stronger woman myself. Anything related to Maxwell and women, or
we can certainly go there. I can throw the opening volley. There are 11 departments and interdisciplinary programs here in the Maxwell School. 3 of them are headed by women. Go.
No, it's just, it helped a lot to come from Maxwell and be a woman at the same time, both for the, for the name and for the expertise that you get while you're doing your studies here, and also for accepting the challenges. And I've always thought, coming from a warm country, coming to Maxwell, and it's very, very cold. This was a small challenge, but I mean, to put things in a bigger scope, people do abroad appreciate that you are a woman who took the risk of traveling to a different country when it's not very welcome to have. For example, in my own village, I'm the only girl who actually got a higher education and who traveled to the US for an education. So you can imagine what kind of background I come from, more or less, and having to explain to them that I'm here for an education, not for example, some bad prostitution, let's say. Mm-hmm. They do ask me those questions, like, why are you there? Like, did they put you in some kind of weird industry? Did they absorb you in the US? I'm like, no, I'm just here I got an education. That's why I got a better job in my home country. And that's why more girls are right now enrolled in schools, and they're traveling to Canada, to the US, to Brazil to get an education. It only sometimes takes one person to get a big number of people changing their minds about things. And I'm glad that this university has equipped me to do that. And because of me, I think more than 6 of my friends in Lebanon came to Syracuse and to Maxwell. Some of them, 2 got their MBAs, and the rest did their MPAs here. And now there's like a huge network, also run by a woman. For the SU alumni in the Middle East is also run by a woman, and the recruitment is pretty high. I mean, the interlinkages. So I think it pays off to be a woman from Maxwell.
Anybody else? Alex or Deborah?
Nothing more to add to that one.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said.
Well, let's open to the floor. I'm sure all of you have some questions or stories to tell of your own. Yes. I think there's a microphone coming around, so if you could just wait a second, that way it'll also make it into the, I guess we're doing live streaming video and they won't be able to hear you. Okay,
Thank you.
just recording. Okay.
I'm Kelly Young, the Director of the Career Development Office, and we're going to be holding a session with you at 2. So I'm going to hold some of my career questions so I can do it then. But I actually had a question related to, all of you have talked about how your unique roles within these cultures that are more male-oriented, like with you in the military, Deborah, your doctorate gave you some credence with them. And Lemi, you were talking about how you were able to interact with the women at a level that then made the men accept you. But I'm curious, did your role with the males in that society and the way you were doing that ever come off as a threat to the women who may have been, say, at the State Department with you because you had that special connection with the military ranking, or because you were interacting, like you were living with the men in a compound and the women were on the outside, and you were working with women on issues that maybe were threatening to the males? I mean, did the women ever feel threatened by the roles you were able to hold? Because it was that third gender, it was different.
I would say in a lot of situations, so this would probably be like Afghanistan, Sudan, definitely my current work in Somalia. A lot of times the males, if the couple goes out in public, the male will be the one talking, and the wife will kind of. I do a lot of interactions with Somali diaspora, and a lot of times the women, even though they're living in America, they won't necessarily initially talk to me at first. They'll kind of whisper the question to the husband. I think almost by building that respect and that trust by the husband, it allows the woman to approach me more. Because what happens is the husband's kind of like, okay, well, I understand where this woman's coming from. I understand what she's wanting to do. And it almost allows that access. It allows her to directly engage me, because the husband's kind of like, okay, well, they seem like they're good people. We understand what's happening. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because just sitting here trying to think through my, experiences, again, always challenges in a job and in a role, but I can't think of particular examples where women, whether it be Bosnia or whether it be in Indonesia or whether it was in Kosovo or Afghanistan, where my particular work and role was threatening to them, or at least that they would express that or show that in some way or the other. confusing to them.
Yeah.
You know, men and women were confused about who was I and what was I doing. And you can imagine, you know, this lone woman shows up at a military base in Bamiyan, Afghanistan, and she's living there for 3 months, and they know that there's a woman coming and going. And what is she actually doing there? Mm-hmm. And so there were certainly some rumors about what they thought I might be doing until people got to know me, but not necessarily women that would be or threatened by my presence or the work I was doing, I don't think.
I mean, it's a funny incident, but, you know, as I said, I was interacting a lot with a lot of Jordanian and Syrian doctors, sometimes over Skype under the name Rania. And sometimes the wives would just pop up on Skype, like, hey, stop talking to my husband. Yeah, so because I used to have like very late night calls, especially, you know, because time in DC is 7 hours, you know, behind the time in the Middle East. And because I do sometimes need some numbers, like tell me what's happening, tell me what kind of medical equipment you need. And then the wife would be like very upset. It's like, stop calling my husband, boom. And then she'd hang up and block me. And then I have to create another account and, you know, find another way. Those kind of things, but, you know, mostly it's about, you know, what's really happening there versus threat. I think in most cases they were very, very open and very excited, you know. It's like you're speaking on their behalf. They're happy that someone has this kind of pseudo-power, to say the least, that, you know, a woman is there, she's young, she's doing that, she's motivated. It kind of gives hope for them and for their, you know, children.
I'm actually going to turn Kelly's question around just a little bit. Do you think your work inspired? I mean, you gave the example of other young women in your village. You think the work that you did in field operations might have been perhaps a role model or an inspiration to some of the women or young girls in the communities that you've worked in? And do you have any examples of those?
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always hope that would be the case. I always hope that, you know, not only are you there to go on a mission to do, you know, medical support where there's a direct skill or capacity or benefit, but I also think all those indirect benefits, and almost like what you were saying with your town, I think hopefully just by being there and kind of leading by example, showing that you can have a job, you can be on par with men, I would hope that would be kind of absorbed or kind of noticed by the local community. Yeah.
I think it is true that people are always watching us, and we have to think about, I was always aware of, as a representative of the U.S. government, but also as a woman, and that people are watching, and what are they seeing? And I know that particularly in my earlier days in Afghanistan, I spent a lot of time going village to village, because in those early days, we were really starting to build a number of projects, a number of reconstruction projects and small projects. And people would see, usually I would travel at that time with one soldier, and so he and I would be driving, or we would be walking through a village, we'd be meeting principals, we'd meet midwives, we'd meet elders, and people would watch partly what you said, Alex, because they had not seen an American woman, and here is suddenly this American woman and they haven't. Many of them had never seen an American or American woman, and so there was constantly eyes on me. But also, I would go to schools and meet with teachers, and particularly in Afghanistan, there used to be in the morning, for instance, it might be when the girls came to school, and in the afternoons it might be when the boys came to school. Or in some villages, they'll have two buildings, and one building is the girls' classes and one is the boys' classes. But when I would go and talk to classes, it was very clear to me that the girls were watching, and they were intrigued with this idea that they would see me get out of a car. So they would, I don't know how many times they would ask me, can you drive? And they were so intrigued with the fact that I could drive, and they were so intrigued, you know, where's your husband, where's your children, where's your, did your parents let you come here? But, you know, all those kinds of questions and the answers that you give them something to think about with their own lives.
Did people used to speak to the man you were with first before they would speak to you?
Men always. If a man, you know, if I'm meeting with business leaders or with the mayor or with elders, they always go to the man first.
Yeah.
Alex?
When I was in South Sudan, there was kind of this, so I was working with women's cooperatives, and I would do a 2-day business training. And all of the women's cooperatives, there'd always be one man, and they felt better that he was there. He was kind of like an uncle figure for them. In one case, he was a bookkeeper, and he took all their money. So it was kind of this blessing and the curse. He like showed up with a new motorbike to a training, and all the women were like, well, he's not allowed in. That's our money. But it was interesting because I did something like, I trained 500 individuals, and every training would have maybe, I don't know, 50 people there, and there'd probably be 3 or 4 men and all women. And the men would always raise their hand with a question. I would ask a question, they always raise their hand. And it was constantly, even though they were the vast minority, I was constantly pushing women to answer, to speak publicly, constantly encouraging them to think. And I knew they knew the answer. And it was just a matter of getting it out, because I don't think they had been in, they definitely had, I mean, most of these people I was working with had 3rd grade education. I think one of the most educated women I met had like 7th grade education. And this is what 22 years of civil war does. It just decimates all infrastructure. Schools are gone. You know, it really just becomes a survival mechanism. So education is really kind of this privileged thing. And I just don't think they were kind of used to being in this environment. They definitely weren't used to having men in the same classroom. And I think it was just, that was one of the things that I would always try to kind of encourage as my own personal thing to get the women to speak and to answer. Because I wanted to like even just simple things like validate that they had the right answer, because I think that just boosts their confidence and makes them more capable of, you know, running their own business and managing things.
One of the, as we're sitting here, and I just thought of this as Alex was talking, is that it's not only the people that in a particular country that we're working with, but it's also our own colleagues. I eventually started having these conversations with my military state AID colleagues when we were in the field, saying to them, people are watching you, and they're watching how you are treating me and your other women colleagues. So when we go into a room and you dominate the conversation, or you don't introduce us, or you walk ahead of us and we have to walk behind you, all those things are communicating. And so just getting them to also think about that was an important, at least it was important for me, and I hope they got something out of it.
Just to add to that, I think with the social media right now and the great things that are happening in parallel with the not very good things that are happening in the world, more girls are inclined to take a step forward and, see that there's opportunities out there, especially where I come from, at least in Lebanon, women are not taking no for an answer. We don't see this much of a difference between what a man can do versus what a woman can do, but we just wanted to push women more to run for elections at the national level. But in terms of businesses, in terms of running NGOs, in terms of education, plus to state that there's way more women than men in Lebanon to start with, you see women at almost every level of society. We don't have those issues of men having to step forward than the woman. So to me, I have not seen it except inside Syria. So yeah, the man would come first and then the woman, and she'd have her face down looking at the floor. And but when they do see you, like little girls, when they do see you coming up front with a bunch of other guys, even living with males has been kind of a challenge and a reward in Jordan. Because in Jordan, it's like a taboo. You cannot have roommates or flatmates unless, if they're of the opposite sex, unless you're married. And I did. Like, technically, I could have been, evicted out of the country in any minute. But, that was part of the deal, just to show a different, a different lifestyle. And, I would say in Lebanon, it's not much of a big deal. But in Syria, Jordan, Turkey, at least I can speak of the areas that I've been to, definitely, it seems it's more serious in Afghanistan and where you guys have worked. Those gender differences are much easier, I would say, to handle and to tackle. So young girls, they do get an education as much as the young boys do. So they don't put the girls aside and then, leave the boys to get the education.
Professor Lovely.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on your own personal empowerment. What you're saying, there have been a few hints. Deborah talked about having mentors. And then she also talked about taking friendly fire from the people that you're with in terms of respect. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the people in your life who have, helped you get through the hard times, maybe not emotionally, but just, you're doing such amazing work. How do you feel empowered to do that, to say, yes, I can just land in Somalia and do this? Were there, mentors in your educational life, in your personal life, through your family connections?
Oops.
Okay, I'll go. My mom is my mentor. She passed away 3 years ago, but she was fighting cancer for 10 years. And while doing that, she was technically going from home to home, telling other women about breast cancer awareness. During the civil war in Lebanon, she was a nurse, trying to help people who got injured along the way. I've always seen her in the field, and she was also a teacher. So I've always seen her in the field, hopping between hospitals and homes and different communities, and also having those. She used to use our home as a big cultural center for women to tell them about their rights and that they should not take crap from their husbands and, all those kind of things. And to me, it was very enlightening. There's a 40 years of age difference between me and my mother. And to see that, and she comes from a conservative family, she did not raise me up to be like that. She always told me to stand up for my rights. Even when I came to Maxwell, she just got her mastectomies done, and she's like, just go. This is your dream. This is your ambition. Do it. And whatever it takes you to give back to your community, do it. Now she's gone, but I still have her, her spirit with me. And my other mentor is my boss. Actually, her name is Sarah Scahill, and she worked for the U.S. government. She was part of the military in Iraq. She's an incredible woman. I mean, she's the typical woman, like the tall, blonde, blue eyes, and she's very, very tough. She would say anything and make it happen. And to me, she was very. She's my role model in the time being. Whenever I want something, I go back to Sarah. I ask her, what do you think is the best thing to do? And she's been to Iraq, Afghanistan, all those. Right now, she's in Jordan. She's leading the regional program for IRD, International Relief and Development. She's just the kind of woman who wouldn't accept no for an answer. And people like her really influence me, and I think others, to just move on and make bold statements.
Alex?
I would almost say there's kind of like three pivotal people of sorts. I graduated and I moved to DC, or was in DC, and got a job at Booz Allen, and I was wearing the business suit, working 60, 70 hours a week, writing reports for various government agencies that didn't take them at all, mostly the IRS. I was doing a lot of strategic redesign of programs there. And I was in Dallas, Texas, and a female boss to me, there was a whole little consulting team, and we had worked a really long day. It's like 10 o'clock at night. And she's like, where would you guys be if you could do anything you wanted? And everyone went around, I'd be a teacher, I would do this. And I was like, I really want to do international development. And it was within a year later, I just started doing research, and I picked 5 countries that I could go as a single American woman. And I just started applying. And I got a job first in Mongolia. And so I went. I got a sabbatical, and I just went. And I don't know, something about that moment, or about working those long hours, or about that kind of boring job. And I was just like, God, I want something more. And she just kind of asked it at the right time. And I'll never forget Katrinda McQueen for asking that. And then I think my parents, I mentioned earlier to Mary, my father's a Navy SEAL, and so I think his threshold for challenge, kind of physically, definitely, but also the challenge of remaining calm in situations. Driving to work in Kabul is not a fun experience, especially when you're going by this roundabout with 3 government buildings. Your hands are sweating, you're watching people walking in and out of the cars, and stand still in traffic, and a car bomb can go off at any point, and you really have to remain calm. And I think my dad is definitely kind of epitomizes that calm, cool, collective mentality you need. And my father just always looked at me. He told me when I went to Afghanistan, he said, it'll be good character building. So, no, there was no concern in his mind whatsoever that I would be going to Afghanistan. My mom grew up, she's American, but kind of grew up in Europe, and she was like, oh, this will be good. This will be an adventure. Only my stepfather said no young woman should go to Afghanistan. So I think, I definitely think kind of the love and support of my parents and I mean, my parents have come and visited me in various forsaken countries around the world. And I think just having that kind of that backbone and that support and kind of the, your mom or a father to show you that they're the kind of the sky's the limit. And then the last person I would say was my first country director in Mongolia, Margaret Hero. And I always used to interact. When I first got there, I started at one NGO and ended up at another. And I would kind of timidly walk up to Mongolians, and I would explain to them things like they'd never been educated in this and that. And I watched Margaret interact with people. And she would curse at them, and she would push them. And she's one of those kind of mean bosses. But what it showed me was you don't treat anyone any differently. If you demand the best out of yourself, you demand the best out of your staff, whether they're Afghani or Mongol or Sudanese. And she's definitely this really tough lady, but it opened up my eyes of kind of how to really interact with people. And I think I was young and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was kind of being nice, but she was like, no, we're here to launch a program. We were doing business support there. We're here to provide business support trainings, like how to do accounting and marketing. And she said, we're going to give them the best training we can. And I spent a year under her in Mongolia, and I just learned so much of like how you interact with people and how you kind of try to push the best out of anyone. And it really does not matter where they're from. So,
Well, similar to what both of you have said is that, first of all, I have to think about my own mother too. I come from Appalachia, and it was a very working class, if I can even say working class. We've been lucky to be called working class family. But my mother was very committed she had 3 daughters, and she was very committed. She herself wasn't able to go to college. She barely finished high school, but she was very committed that her daughters would not end up in Appalachia, would not end up with lots of children and no school and struggling. And so she was very committed to education. So that was even when I went to kindergarten, I remember her talking about school and how important school was. And then I have certainly seen that in every place that I've been. I think the best money that we can put, best investment is in girls' education. But my mother really, lived it and believed it and supported it. And so that's very important. And I remember I was here as a government official in Onondaga County. I was actually at the Board of Elections, and I remember getting a call very early one morning before coming to work, about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I pick up the phone and they say, this is Dick Holbrook's office. Dick Holbrook used to be an ambassador. He's passed on now. And they said, we understand that you know something about civic engagement and citizenship and elections and public administration and all that stuff, and we're needing, someone that knows something about that to go to Bosnia and to Croatia. You may know that they've just signed a peace deal. And I remember, I thought, well, and I had actually been thinking about, expanding sort of my work or where I might be going next in life. And I'd actually been a Fulbright scholar in my undergraduate days and had a great love and I had been in India, and so I had been thinking about maybe going back to or looping my career back to international development in some way or international affairs. So I remember calling my mother after I got off the phone, and I said, have you been following the war in Bosnia? And my mother stays current with events. She still to this day reads a newspaper every morning from front to cover. And she goes, yes. And I said, well, what do you think about me going? And there's this long pause. And she says, it's exactly what you've always wanted to do. She goes, do what you want to do. And so, that sort of permission and support, so very, very important, and sort of started my career back into international affairs. Also, I had a boss at the time, the same kind of experience. I went into him that day and talked to him about this, and he was so terribly supportive. And I was really a beneficiary here in Syracuse. There was a time, I don't mean to say it's not still that way, but there was a time here in the late 70s and the 80s and 90s where as a young woman here in Syracuse, there was a very vibrant community of women movers and shakers. And so whether it be Rosemary Pooler, who was a Court of Appeals judge, whether it's Elaine Lytle, who's passed on but was our first woman Democratic county clerk, there was a whole group of women who had, that I followed and that they opened doors for me. And I knew them and they inspired me and supported me. So it'd be hard to name all of them, but I just think about all those faces and all those women here in Syracuse that really were life-changing for me.
Women whose shoulders we stand on.
That's it.
Well, I know we have another panel later in the afternoon, so it's not your last opportunity to talk with our panelists, but I also know there's another event coming on and we're supposed to kind of jet out of here. We do have some little tchotchke things to thank you for visiting, and if you'll please all join me in thanking our panelists for their presentations.